What if I told you that right now, in laboratories around the world, scientists aren't just editing life, they're writing it from scratch? For billions of years, evolution has been the sole author of life's instruction manual. But today, we're picking up the pen ourselves. The question isn't whether we can rewrite nature's code anymore. It's whether we should and what happens when we do. Let's start with what we mean by rewriting nature's code. Every living thing on Earth, from the bacteria in your gut to the tree outside your window, operates on the same basic programming language, DNA. Four chemical letters A, T, G, and C. These letters form genes, genes form genomes, and genomes form the blueprint for life. For decades, we've been tinkering with this code. We've inserted genes from one organism into another. We've knocked out genes to see what happens. We've bred organisms with desirable traits. But that's like editing an existing book. Changing a word here, a sentence there. Synthetic biology is different. Synthetic biology is writing entirely new chapters. Sometimes it's writing entirely new books. So how far have we actually come? In 2010, Craig Venner and his team did something that made headlines around the world. They created the first synthetic bacterial cell. They didn't just edit an existing bacterium. They synthesized an entire genome from scratch, based on computer designs, and transplanted it into an empty bacterial shell. When that cell started dividing and living, it became the first organism in Earth's history whose parent was a computer. But that was just the beginning. Scientists have now created bacteria with entirely synthetic genomes that are smaller and more efficient than anything nature designed. We're talking about organisms stripped down to only the essential genes needed for life, minimal organisms that could become chassis for building biological machines. We've engineered yeast to produce opioids for medicine, bacteria to manufacture spider silk proteins, and microorganisms that can eat plastic waste. We've even expanded the genetic alphabet itself, adding new letters beyond A, T, G, and C, creating organisms with genetic codes that have never existed in nature's 4 billion-year history. But here's where it gets truly profound. We're not just creating new organisms. We're creating new forms of life. Let me explain what that means. There's a concept in synthetic biology called synobiology, the study of life built on alternative biochemical foundations. Imagine organisms that use entirely different amino acids to build their proteins. Imagine life that uses a different genetic code altogether. Imagine organisms so fundamentally different from natural life that they couldn't exchange genes with Earth's biosphere even if they tried. This isn't science fiction. Researchers have already created bacteria with unnatural amino acids incorporated into their proteins. They've engineered cells that require synthetic nutrients that don't exist in nature, meaning these organisms literally can't survive outside the lab without human intervention. Some scientists are even exploring the possibility of mirror life, organisms built from mirror image versions of biological molecules. Every molecule has a handedness, and all Earth life uses the same handed versions. But what if we built life using the opposite hand? It would be chemically life, but so alien to our biology that it might not even be recognized by our immune systems. Now, this is where we need to pause and ask the harder questions. When we create entirely new forms of life, what responsibility do we bear? We're not just playing God in the metaphorical sense. We're literally designing living things that could reproduce, evolve, and potentially escape into the wild. Consider the ethical dimensions. If we create a minimal synthetic organism, is it truly alive in the way we understand life? Does it have any form of value or rights? When we design it solely as a tool, a living factory for medicine or fuel, have we crossed a line? And what about unintended consequences? Evolution is brilliant at finding workarounds. Life finds a way, as they say. What happens when our synthetic organisms evolve in ways we didn't predict? What if they develop the ability to survive outside their controlled environments? What if they interact with natural ecosystems in ways we can't foresee? There's also the security question. The same tools that let us engineer helpful bacteria could engineer dangerous ones. The knowledge to create synthetic life is increasingly accessible. The cost is plummeting. What happens when this technology becomes available not just to university labs, but to anyone with a garage and an internet connection? But let's not focus only on the risks, because the potential benefits are staggering. Imagine bacteria engineered to seek out and destroy cancer cells in your body, living, thinking medicines that adapt to your specific disease. Imagine microorganisms that pull carbon dioxide from the atmosphere efficiently than any tree, helping us combat climate change. Imagine synthetic organisms that clean up oil spills, produce clean fuel, manufacture materials without pollution, or even grow organs for transplant. We're talking about solutions to some of humanity's greatest challenges: disease, hunger, energy, climate change, resource scarcity. Synthetic biology offers us tools that could reshape our relationship with the natural world entirely. Some researchers argue that we have a moral obligation to pursue this technology. How many lives could be saved by synthetic organisms that produce cheap insulin or antimalarial drugs? How much suffering could be prevented if we could engineer crops that thrive in drought conditions or produce more nutrition? There's also something deeply philosophical happening here. For the first time in human history, we're not just discovering how life works. We're becoming authors of life itself. This changes our relationship with nature fundamentally. For millennia, humans have seen ourselves as part of nature subject to its laws. Then we learn to manipulate nature to bend it to our will. Now we're transcending that relationship entirely. We're not just participants in the story of life on Earth, we're becoming co-authors. What does that mean for how we understand ourselves? For how we understand life? If we can create living things that have never existed, that challenges our notions of natural versus artificial, of sacred versus profane. Some people find this prospect exhilarating, a new chapter in human ingenuity and creativity. Others find it terrifying, a hubris that will lead to our downfall. Many of us feel both at once. So where do we draw the line? Most scientists working in synthetic biology argue for careful regulation and oversight. The field has actually been remarkably proactive about self-governance, establishing guidelines and safety protocols before governments even asked for them. There are biosafety measures engineering organisms that can't survive outside controlled conditions, building and kill switches that destroy cells if they escape, using biological containment strategies that make organisms dependent on synthetic nutrients. There are also ethical frameworks being developed, questions about what kinds of organisms should be created, who gets to decide, how we ensure equitable access to the benefits, and how we prevent misuse. But here's the challenge. Technology always moves faster than regulation. By the time we've agreed on guidelines for today's capabilities, tomorrow's breakthroughs have already arrived. And there's a global dimension too. Even if one country decides certain experiments are too dangerous, what's to stop another country from pursuing them? Science doesn't respect borders. Let me offer a perspective that might be uncomfortable. Maybe the question isn't whether we should rewrite nature's code, but how we learn to do it wisely. Because here's the truth, we're already doing it. The technology exists. The knowledge is spreading. The genie is out of the bottle. Every generation of humans has faced technologies that seem to offer both salvation and destruction. Nuclear power, the internet, artificial intelligence, and each time, we've had to learn to live with our own power, to develop wisdom to match our capabilities. Synthetic biology is our generation's test. Can we create new forms of life without destroying the life we already have? Can we engineer organisms to solve our problems without creating worse problems in the process? Can we play the role of creator responsibly? I don't have those answers. I don't think anyone does yet. But I do know this. The conversation we're having right now about ethics, about responsibility, about what it means to create life, this conversation is just as important as the science itself. Because ultimately, synthetic biology isn't just a question of what we can do. It's a question of who we want to be. Do we want to be the species that wrote new chapters in the book of life with wisdom and care? Or the species that grabbed the pen without thinking about the words we were writing? The tools to rewrite nature's code are in our hands. We've already begun creating life forms that have never existed in Earth's 4 billion-year history. We're standing at a threshold that humanity has never crossed before. And the really profound part, we're making these choices right now, in labs across the world, in policy discussions in government buildings, in ethical debates in universities, and in conversations like this one. The next forms of life on this planet might not be discovered. They might be designed. And we're the ones who get to decide what that means. So I'll leave you with this, knowing what you know now. What do you think? Should we be creating entirely new forms of life? Where would you draw the line? And what role do you think we should play in shaping the future of life on Earth? Because this isn't just a question for scientists anymore. It's a question for all of us. The code of life is being rewritten, and in some small way, we're all holding